Rain didn't fall that night, but it felt like it had rained for hours. The final whistle had blown, yet the silence in the stadium was louder than ever. Barcelona had lost. Again. And this time, it was the Champions League dream that slipped away. You could feel it in the air, the kind of silence that presses on your chest as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Players dropped to the ground. Some prayed. Others stared into the void, as if searching for an answer in the empty stands. And then, somewhere among the scattered jerseys and crumpled hopes, was a 16-year-old boy. His jersey stuck to his skin, his breathing uneven. No one noticed him leave the pitch. No headlines screamed his name that night. But in the early hours of the morning, he did something that would touch millions. He wrote a letter. Not a public statement approved by PR teams. Not a marketing campaign dressed up as a message. Just a letter. Honest. Bare. Unfiltered. We won't stop until we put this club where it belongs. 12 words. And in those 12 words, a heartbeat. A vow. A spark that somehow lit the fire again for a fan base numbed by disappointment. Lamine Yamal didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't beg for support. He made a promise. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it hit so hard. This isn't just a story about football. It's about what you do when you fall. It's about how you keep walking when your legs no longer believe in you. It's about silence, and how sometimes the softest voices are the ones that stay with us the longest. This is the story of Lamine Yamal, and the letter that reminded us how to believe again. The locker room was a museum of silence. Socks were strewn across the floor. Water bottles lay untouched. Tape curled at the edges of benches. But no one moved. The usual clamor of disappointment, grunts, curses, even sobs, had given way to something more haunting. Stillness. In that stillness, Lamine Yamal sat on a wooden bench alone. He hadn't taken off his boots. The laces were still tight around his ankles. His head was bowed as if he were waiting for something, maybe a voice, maybe a sign. But all that came was the buzz of a flickering overhead light. He pulled out his phone, not to scroll, not to distract, but to watch. The game. Again. Every missed opportunity. Every step he took. Every time he should have passed. Every time he didn't. He watched until his eyes turned glassy, but he never looked away. People think athletes move on quickly, that they train, play, win, or lose, and then do it all over again. But they forget that some losses echo, some stay, especially when you're 16. At 2:47 a.m., the others had gone. The janitor paused outside the room but didn't say anything. He recognized the weight of that silence. That's when Lamine began to type. He didn't plan to post it. At first it was just for himself. A way to not drown. We gave it our all, he wrote. Then paused, deleted it, typed again. This year it couldn't be, but we'll be back. Again, he stopped. Backspace. Silence. Then finally, we won't. Stop until we put this club where it belongs. He looked at that line for a long time. There was no poetry to it, no drama, just conviction, a promise he wasn't sure how to keep yet but knew he had to. He pressed send and went to bed with his boots still on. By morning, the message had already circled the globe. Some fans cried, others just stared at the screen. Many didn't even realize how young he was. But there it was. A child's voice speaking with the soul of a veteran. The day after, he didn't train. He ran, alone, up the hills just outside Barcelona. No music, no cameras, just footsteps. Just lungs that burned and legs that trembled. He wasn't running from the loss. He was running into it. A coach once told him, "You never forget the games. You lose. But you get to choose what kind of player they make you." Lamine was choosing. Every drop of sweat, every step uphill, was part of that choice. He didn't post again for a week. Not because he had nothing to say, but because sometimes the promise isn't in what you tell the world, it's in what you tell yourself in the dark and mean it. Before there were stadiums, there was a street. Before the roar of 90,000 fans, there was the sound of one old football bouncing off cracked pavement and a mother's voice yelling for dinner. This was where Lamine Yamal first led, not with words, but with his feet. The kind of leadership that doesn't look like speeches or captain's armbands, just someone always choosing the hardest role, taking the ball when others froze, passing when he could have scored. At 11 years old, he arrived at La Masia with a plastic bag instead of a suitcase. Inside, one pair of worn cleats, a jersey too big, and a folded letter from his father. "Play free, son, and never forget who you are." He didn't. The coaches at La Masia called him El Silencio. The silence, not because he was shy, but because he watched more than he spoke, studied, absorbed, and then he'd explode on the pitch, weaving between boys 3 years older, as if dancing through invisible threads only he could see. One coach said, "This kid doesn't talk, but he understands the game like a grown man." But off the pitch, life was different. There were nights he cried himself to sleep. Missed birthdays, missed home, missed his mother's lentil soup. He had talent, yes. But what people forget is that greatness costs, especially when it comes early. At 13, he played against players twice his size, took hits that left bruises under his ribs, but he never flinched, because he remembered the letter. Because silence, he learned, was not weakness, it was focus. At 15, he got the call. First team. He stared at the message, then at the jersey with his name stitched on the back. He didn't smile, didn't cry, just held the fabric to his chest and whispered, "This is for you, Papa." His debut was not glamorous. 20 minutes, no goals. But one pass changed everything, not because it led to a goal, but because of what happened after. When the final whistle blew, he walked up to a janitor still sweeping the stands. The same, one who used to see him run sprints alone. He handed him his jersey. The janitor, stunned, asked, "Why me?" Lamine smiled. "Because you were there before they noticed me." It spread online like wildfire. But he didn't post it. He never said much. But in the quiet, people were beginning to hear him. Then came the wait. Headlines, cameras, reporters. Some called him the next Messi. Others, a media darling. But he ignored it all. Because leadership, to him, wasn't about spotlight. It was about sacrifice. When an injured teammate struggled through drills, Lamine stayed after practice. When a new academy kid cried after his first week, Lamine handed him his boots. "You'll grow into them," he said. That's what leadership looked like. Not loud, not flashy, just constant, just present. He wasn't chasing greatness. He was becoming it. Silently. And so when the Champions League defeat came, when millions looked for someone to rage or to blame, he didn't scream. He wrote a letter. Because the boy who led with silence knew how to speak exactly when the world needed it most. It began with a message, a letter. 12 words that whispered louder than any speech. "We won't stop until we put this club where it belongs." And somewhere in the world, a boy read it on a cracked phone screen in a one-bedroom apartment. His jersey was fake, stitched by hand, but his hope was real. He saved that letter as a screenshot, not because it was from a star, but because it felt like it was meant for him. Lamine Yamal never knew his name, never saw his face. But that didn't matter, because when Lamine wrote to the fans, he wasn't writing to the masses. He was writing to each of them, one by one. The old man in Montjuic who hadn't missed a home game since 1973, the nurse on the night shift who watched the match on her break, the young girl in Nigeria who played barefoot in a Barca shirt 2 sizes too big. They all read the letter. And somehow, they all felt the same thing. We're not alone. That's what unity looks like. Not everyone holding hands and singing in harmony. but 1,000 hearts beating in sync because one voice reminded them why they loved this game in the first place. After the defeat, while the media hunted for drama, Lamine went home. Not to sulk, not to hide, but to prepare. He knew what Sunday meant, not just another league match. It was something more fragile, more sacred, a moment to heal. The stadium wasn't full, the energy was unsure. And yet, the boy who had promised to return, to lead, now stood ready to unite. He didn't start the match. He sat on the bench, hoodie over his head, eyes scanning the pitch. When his name was called in the 68th minute, he stood slowly, stretched, took one breath, and stepped onto the grass like it was hallowed ground. What followed wasn't a wonder goal. It wasn't a viral assist. It was something far simpler, but infinitely more powerful. He ran. Every ball chased. Every tackle pressed. Every pass was made like it was life or death. Not for stats, not for scouts, but for them. For the ones in the stands who still believed, barely. In the 90th minute, he didn't score. But he looked to the crowd, hand on his chest, and whispered, "We're still here." The camera didn't catch it, but 40,000 saw it, and 40 million felt it later. That night, a father told his son, "You see that boy? That's how you play when you love something." In the press room, a reporter asked Lamine, "Why do you think the fans have connected with you so deeply?" He smiled. "I think, maybe because I never stopped being one of them. That's the secret, the connection, the invisible thread." He didn't separate himself from the people who cheered for him. He reached back for them, spoke to them, carried them with him. Not a prodigy, not a savior, just one of them. And in a world where fame often builds walls, Lamine Yamal opened a door instead. He reminded us that football isn't just goals and trophies. It's a language, a memory, a place we return to when the world becomes too heavy, and sometimes all it takes is one boy to remind us how to speak it again. He didn't say much, he never does, but maybe silence was his greatest message of all. When the lights went down in Camp Nou that night, when the stands finally emptied and only echoes remained, there was a stillness, the kind that doesn't scream, but stays. Lamine walked the length of the pitch alone. No cameras followed, no crowd cheered, just him and the outline of the field where dreams are won, and sometimes broken. He paused at the center circle, looked up at the sky, then slowly bent down and touched the grass. Not to pray, not to pose, just to say thank you for all of it, for the loss, for the pain, for the privilege of playing, because he knew something the world hadn't fully realized, yet that this was just the beginning. Lamine Yamal is 16. His voice is still changing, his hands are still growing, and yet, he carries himself like someone who's seen lifetimes, like someone who knows that legacy isn't built in goals or trophies. It's built in moments like these, moments that go unnoticed by the stats, moments where you choose kindness over rage, stillness over noise, hope over despair. As he left the field that night, he didn't wave. He didn't look back. He just disappeared into the tunnel, hoodie pulled over his head, as if he were walking into the next chapter of his life. And maybe, just maybe, we're the lucky ones, because we get to watch him write it. This is not the end. This is not the full story. This is only the silence between the words, and if you listen closely, you can already hear the next line coming. One match, one promise. One boy who reminded us that football is not about what you win, it's about who you become when you lose. Stay close, because next time, when the whistle blows, he'll be there, and so will we.